The store manager pointed at him, voice trembling with manufactured outrage. That's him. He's the one who stole it. Within seconds, Malik was slammed onto the sticky supermarket floor, his shopping bag scattering, security guards kneeling hard into his back. His only crime? Buying groceries while black in a wealthy suburb. Receipt in hand, money in pocket, none of it mattered. Because in their eyes, no black man could afford honesty. They didn't know Malik Parker was about to burn their whole lie to the ground. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching us from. Malik Parker adjusted the heavy grocery bags in his arms as he stepped through the automatic doors of Westfield Market, the biggest, fanciest grocery store in Oak Ridge Heights. He wiped sweat from his forehead. It was one of those hot, heavy afternoons when the Texas air felt like syrup. He hadn't planned to shop here. Normally, he stuck to his regular store across town. But today was different. He was picking up special ingredients for his mother's birthday dinner. Only Westfield carried them. Malik wore his usual clean jeans, a Houston Astros cap pulled low, a crisp navy t-shirt. Simple, unthreatening. At least, he thought so. He barely made it 5 steps into the parking lot when he heard the shouting. Hey, stop him. That's him. He turned, heart freezing mid-beat. The store manager, a thin man with slicked back hair and a red tattoo tied around his neck, pointed directly at him, shouting hysterically. Security guards rushed from inside. Malik blinked in confusion, stepping back instinctively. What's going on? He asked, trying to keep his voice calm. But they didn't listen. 2 guards grabbed him roughly, the groceries tumbling from his arms, tomatoes and oranges splattering against the asphalt. The receipt fluttered to the ground, unnoticed. Malik struggled to keep his balance, but they shoved him hard, forcing him face first onto the dirty pavement. Knees dug into his back. Hands yanked his arms behind him. Pain shot through his shoulder. Around them, a crowd began to gather, phones raised, faces blank with curiosity, some smirking, some whispering. You're under investigation for theft, one guard barked into his ear. Stay still, or it's resisting. I didn't steal anything. Malik gasped. I paid. Check the receipt. One of the guards slammed a knee harder into his spine. The manager hovered above, his face a mask of fake outrage. He matched the description, the manager said loudly for the crowd. We're detaining him until police arrive. Malik turned his head painfully to the side, spotting his crumpled receipt lying just a few feet away. So close. So useless. He wasn't a person anymore. He was a match. A description. And as the sirens wailed closer in the distance, Malik knew one brutal truth. In their eyes, he was guilty the moment he walked through the door. It didn't matter what was in his wallet. It didn't matter what was in his heart. The system had already written the ending they wanted. But Malik Parker wasn't going to let them finish his story. Not without a fight they'd never forget. The flashing red and blue lights washed over Malik's body as 2 police cruisers screeched to a stop in front of the supermarket. Within seconds, 4 officers spilled out, hands on their holsters, faces set in cold, unreadable masks. The security guards straightened, one of them keeping a heavy knee pressed into Malik's back. We caught him stealing, the store manager blurted out immediately. Matched the description exactly. Black male, dark shirt, baseball cap. Malik struggled to lift his head. I didn't steal anything, he shouted. Check the receipt. It's right there. One of the officers, a stocky sergeant with mirrored sunglasses, sauntered over, barely glancing at the fluttering piece of paper on the ground. Instead, he crouched down beside Malik, his shadow falling heavy over him. You got ID on you? The sergeant barked. Malik gritted his teeth against the pain. In my back pocket. Without a word, the officer yanked his wallet out roughly, flipping through it as if it were garbage. Behind him, more shoppers gathered, some filming, others whispering and nodding as if everything happening made perfect, natural sense. Malik squeezed his eyes shut. The humiliation, hotter than the Texas sun, burned through him. He could hear them, the murmurs. But he's done this before. Probably has a record. Shouldn't dress like that if he doesn't want trouble. Every lie piling on his back, heavier than the guards pinning him down. Finally, after what felt like an hour, one of the younger officers bent down and picked up the crumpled receipt. He studied it, frowning. Sergeant, he said carefully. This says he paid. Full price. Timestamp matches 10 minutes ago. The sergeant barely reacted. Maybe it's fake, he muttered. Maybe he grabbed someone else's bag. Malik turned his head painfully toward the officer holding the receipt. Check the store cameras, he rasped. You'll see me paying. You'll see it all. The officer hesitated, glancing at the sergeant. The sergeant scowled. Bag him and bring him in. We'll sort it out downtown. Malik's blood turned to ice. They weren't looking for the truth. They were looking for a story that fit the ending they had already decided. The younger officer shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Silence was safer. Malik felt the cuffs tighten around his wrists as they hauled him roughly to his feet. The crowd parted without sympathy, their eyes sliding away as if to say, "Better you than me." The store manager stood off to the side, arms crossed, smug and righteous. Malik stared at him, chest heaving. The man couldn't even meet his gaze. Because deep down, he knew. They all knew. But none of them cared. The back door of the police cruiser slammed shut behind Malik, sealing him into a cocoon of heat and despair. As the car pulled away from the curb, Malik pressed his forehead against the window, heart hammering. He wasn't just fighting for his freedom now. He was fighting for his existence. And deep inside, under the rage, under the humiliation, a cold, sharp promise began to form. They would pay for this. Every single one of them. The fluorescent lights inside the station buzzed overhead, casting a sickly yellow glow over cracked tile floors and scratched walls. Malik sat on a hard metal bench, wrists cuffed to a loop bolted into the wall. Sweat rolled down his back. Not from fear, from rage barely held in check. The room smelled like bleach, old coffee, and something sour. An officer, different from the ones who arrested him, older, balding, a cigarette dangling from his lip, sauntered in holding a clipboard. He dropped it onto the table with a loud slap. "Let's make this easy, son," he drawled. "Sign a statement admitting you attempted to shoplift. We'll process you quick, maybe cut you loose with a warning." Malik laughed, short and bitter. "I'm not signing anything," he said coldly. The officer shrugged lazily. "Suit yourself. You can sit in there until Monday. Your call." Malik leaned forward slightly, the cuffs clinking against the metal loop. "Call my lawyer," he said. The officer blew out a stream of smoke. "No lawyer until after formal charges," he said. "You know how it works." Malik's stomach twisted. It was a lie. He had the right to an attorney immediately. But lies were the only language they spoke here. The officer pulled the folding chair close and dropped into it heavily. "Look, kid," he said, voice dropping into something almost friendly. "You're not going to win. Best thing you can do is own up, show some remorse, and maybe this doesn't follow you for the rest of your life." Malik's fists clenched so tight the veins stood out along his arms. They wanted to trap him. Not because they had evidence. Not because he had done anything wrong. But because in their world, guilt was the default setting for a black man. They just needed a signature to make it official. Malik sat back against the wall, breathing slowly, refusing to give them even a flicker of weakness. The door creaked open again. Another officer stepped in, a younger woman this time, her badge polished, her mouth set in a tight line. She glanced at Malik, then at the clipboard. "He's asking for a lawyer," she said quietly to the older cop. He waved her off. "He'll change his mind. They always do." The younger officer hesitated. Then she turned sharply on her heel and left. Malik watched her go, a tiny flicker of something, not hope, not yet, but awareness flickering in the back of his mind. Not everyone in this building was comfortable with what was happening. And if he could survive long enough, if he could resist the pressure, if he could force the system to follow its own rules, he could turn their lies against them. The older officer shoved the clipboard across the table again. "Last chance." Malik stared at it, then at him, and said, in a voice so quiet it barely cut through the buzzing lights, "I'm not confessing to something I didn't do." The officer's mouth twisted into a smirk. "Suit yourself, hero." He snatched the clipboard away and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Malik sagged slightly against the wall, the adrenaline drain hitting him like a truck. But inside, something hardened even further. They thought he would fold. They thought he would break. But they were wrong. He wasn't just going to survive this. He was going to tear it down from the inside out. Hours passed. No phone call. No food. No water. Just the stale, recycled air of the holding cell pressing against Malik's skin like a second, suffocating layer. Every so often, a deputy would pass by, glance through the narrow window, and move on without a word, letting him stew, letting the hours weigh heavier on his body and mind. It was a tactic. He knew it. They were trying to break him without ever laying another hand on him. Make him desperate enough to beg. Make him scared enough to fold. But Malik didn't move. Didn't speak. Didn't yield. The door creaked again. A different officer this time, a man in his early 30s with a shaved head and nervous eyes, stepped into the room. He didn't swagger like the others. Didn't sneer. He held a manila folder tightly against his chest, almost like a shield. Parker, he said, clearing his throat. We need to take your statement. Malik shook his head once, slow and deliberate. Lawyer first. The officer hesitated, eyes darting toward the security camera mounted high in the corner of the room. He stepped closer, voice dropping to a whisper. Look, I'm not supposed to say this, but you're not even formally booked yet. They're holding you in a gray zone. Malik narrowed his eyes. Meaning? The officer glanced over his shoulder, then leaned in. They didn't log you into the system. No official record you're even here yet. If you sit quiet long enough, they can claim you were never processed. No paper trail. Malik's blood ran cold. That was why no one had read him his rights. Why they denied him a phone call. Why no fingerprinting, no mugshot. If they could erase the paperwork, they could erase him. Plead guilty or vanish into administrative nowhere. A ghost. The officer straightened suddenly as footsteps echoed down the hallway. I didn't tell you anything, he muttered. Then he was gone. The door slammed shut behind him. Malik sat frozen, mind racing. He wasn't just fighting accusations anymore. He was fighting for the right to exist at all, officially, legally, visibly. He needed proof he was here. Now, before they buried him in paperwork and lies. He scanned the room, the security camera in the corner. Small, dusty, but active. A tiny blinking red light. He couldn't access it himself. But if that footage survived, if he ever got access to it, it would show everything. The illegal detention. The denial of his rights. The absence of proper booking. He closed his eyes for a moment, forcing himself to breathe, to think. He needed a witness. Someone outside this building. Someone who could raise hell before they could erase him. And then it clicked. The grocery store. The witnesses who filmed everything. The boy on the sidewalk, phone raised, recording. If he could find that footage, if it hit the internet, they wouldn't be able to hide anything. It wouldn't just be Malik's word against the officer's lies. It would be the world watching. His heart slammed harder now, not from fear, but from focus. He didn't need them to give him justice. He just needed enough light to make hiding impossible. And once that light hit them, the whole dirty machine would start to burn. Outside the thick concrete walls of the precinct, the first spark had already been lit. A teenager named Darnell Lewis, the boy who had filmed everything on his phone, uploaded the video to his Instagram account with a caption that simply read, he showed his receipt. They slammed him anyway. Hashtag Westfield Market, hashtag Oak Ridge Police. Within minutes, it began to spread. First through local community groups. Then through bigger accounts, activists, journalists, lawyers. By the time the sun dipped low over the Houston skyline, the video had racked up over 300,000 views. And growing. The footage was undeniable. Malik calmly exiting the store, grocery bags in hand. The receipt slipping from his fingers as security tackled him. His shouts, I paid. Check the receipt, echoing across the asphalt. No aggression. No theft. No threat. Just a man brutalized for existing in the wrong skin. Inside the precinct, the shift changed. Malik watched as the energy shifted too. Guards who had once sneered now avoided his eyes. Officers spoke in hushed tones, glancing nervously at their phones between tasks. The atmosphere cracked, heavy with fear. Because they knew. The lie wasn't holding. The video had ripped their cover off, frame by frame. Malik sat up straighter on the metal bench, every nerve sharpened. He wasn't free yet, but the walls were starting to shake. An hour later, a flustered officer, someone Malik hadn't seen before, unlocked the cell door. You're being moved, he said curtly. Standard procedure. Malik's instinct screamed at him. This wasn't standard. This was panic. They were trying to get ahead of the storm now gathering outside. He didn't resist. Didn't argue. He followed, biding his time. They led him not to booking, but to a small, windowless interview room. Two detectives sat waiting, a man and a woman, both middle-aged, both wearing the strained politeness of people who knew they were cornered. The woman spoke first, her voice syrupy. Mr. Parker, we're very sorry for the misunderstanding earlier today. We'd like to clear this up. Malik leaned forward, staring at them without blinking. I want my lawyer. And I want the footage from your security cameras preserved. Every second. The male detective's mouth tightened. The woman forced a smile. Of course, of course. We're happy to cooperate. It was a lie. He could see it in their eyes. They were scrambling, desperate to spin, to twist, to salvage their own skins before the flames reached them. Malik said nothing more. Just folded his arms across his chest and waited. Because now they were trapped. Not him. Outside, The video had exploded into the mainstream news cycle. ABC, CNN, local channels, all airing the footage, all asking the same question. Why was a paying black customer tackled and arrested despite clear evidence of his innocence? Civil rights attorneys began flooding Malik's family with offers of representation. Community leaders demanded a full investigation. And Westfield Market? Their corporate PR team issued a cold, panicked statement. We are aware of a concerning incident involving a customer and are cooperating fully with authorities. Too little, too late. The public wasn't interested in polished apologies. They wanted accountability. And Malik Parker, bruised, battered, but unbroken, was ready to deliver it. By the time Malik was finally allowed his first official phone call, the world outside had already exploded. The officer handed him a dusty old landline phone without making eye contact. Malik didn't waste a second. He dialed the number he had memorized years ago, the number his mother had drilled into him. Attorney Isaiah Brooks, civil rights specialist, feared by police departments across Texas. The line clicked once, twice, and then a sharp, steady voice answered. Malik? Where are you? Malik's throat tightened, but he forced the words out clearly. Fulton Station. Oak Ridge Heights. They tried to bury me. Isaiah didn't ask for details. Didn't need to. Sit tight, he said. I'm on my way. Less than an hour later, the building shook with the kind of authority real power carries. Isaiah Brooks walked through the precinct doors flanked by 2 junior attorneys, a legal assistant, and, most importantly, a local news crew tipped off to his arrival. The desk sergeant stammered and sweated as Isaiah slammed paperwork onto the counter. A demand for Malik's immediate release. A formal notification of pending federal civil rights litigation. An emergency motion to preserve all internal security footage. All in duplicate. All ready for court. Behind the desk, officers scrambled like rats sensing a flood. Malik sat in the interview room as Isaiah stormed in, briefcase in one hand, fire in his eyes. You're done talking to them, Isaiah said bluntly. From now on, every word goes through me. He turned to the officers hovering awkwardly in the doorway. And unless you have formal charges filed, signed by a judge, my client walks. Now, the officers hesitated. The tension in the room cracked. Finally, the older detective muttered. We'll process the release paperwork. It was over. At least, this part. But Isaiah didn't look satisfied. Not even close. We're just getting started, he muttered under his breath. Word spread fast. As Malik signed his release forms, reporters clustered outside the precinct, shoving microphones toward the door. He stepped into the humid night air and was instantly blinded by flashing cameras. Questions bombarded him. Mr. Parker, what happened inside? Will you be suing the police department? Do you believe race played a role in your arrest? Malik paused for a breath, Isaiah steady beside him. He could feel the rage of 1,000 injustices boiling in his chest. But he didn't explode. He didn't scream. He spoke clearly, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. I paid for my groceries. I showed my receipt. I was tackled anyway. He lifted his bruised wrists into the camera lights. This is what shopping while black looks like in Oak Ridge Heights. And then, quietly, for everyone watching. We're going to make sure it never happens again. The crowd roared with applause. Somewhere behind the cameras, Malik's mother cried softly, her hands pressed over her mouth. The first battle was over. But the war, the real war for accountability, for dignity, for change, was just beginning. And Malik Parker wasn't going to stop until the system that tried to erase him was forced to see him. Fully. Permanently. Unapologetically. The morning after Malik's release, the city of Oak Ridge Heights woke up to a reality it could no longer deny. Headlines screamed from every newsstand and phone screen. Black man wrongfully detained after grocery shopping video sparks outrage. Civil rights lawsuit filed against Oak Ridge Heights Police Department. Calls for police chief's resignation grow after viral arrest footage. The pressure was immediate and relentless. At a hastily called press conference, the Oak Ridge police chief, a grizzled man with silver hair and a reputation for tough policing, stood stiffly at a podium. The cameras flashed. His voice shook slightly as he read from a statement. We take these allegations very seriously. We will conduct an internal review. We ask the public to remain patient as we investigate. It was scripted. It was hollow. And nobody believed a word of it. Because the footage didn't lie. And Malik's voice, calm and undeniable, was already etched into the public conscience. By noon, community leaders staged a protest outside City Hall. Hundreds marched, not chanting, not shouting, but marching in complete silence, holding signs. "We see you, Malik. Accountability now. Shopping while black is not a crime." Meanwhile, Isaiah Brooks moved like a storm through the legal system. He filed a massive federal civil rights lawsuit against the Oak Ridge Heights Police Department, the store manager and Westfield Market, individual officers by name. The allegations were scathing: false arrest, malicious prosecution, violation of constitutional rights, racial profiling, intentional infliction of emotional distress. Within 48 hours, the Department of Justice opened a formal investigation into the precinct's practices. Federal agents quietly arrived, requesting decades of arrest records, stop-and-frisk logs, use-of-force reports. And what they found was worse than anyone imagined. Black residents made up only 12% of Oak Ridge Heights' population, but 68% of all arrests for suspicious behavior. Traffic stops were disproportionately targeted at black drivers, often for broken taillights or failure to signal. Internal complaints of racial bias were systematically ignored or buried. The truth poured out faster than the department could contain it. By the end of the week, one officer resigned quietly. 2 supervisors were placed on administrative leave, and whispers of criminal charges against the officers who arrested Malik grew louder. But Malik wasn't celebrating yet. He sat in Isaiah's office, hands folded tightly in his lap, watching the news scroll across the television. "They're scared," Isaiah said, tapping a pen against his desk. "You forced them into the sunlight." Malik nodded slowly. "Good. Because this wasn't just about getting a settlement. It wasn't just about clearing his name. It was about forcing the system to admit, not just that they had hurt him, but that the system itself was built to hurt people like him. And this time, they weren't getting away with it. Not behind closed doors. Not with whispered apologies. Public. Painful. Permanent. That was the only kind of justice Malik Parker was willing to accept. And he was just getting started. By the start of the next week, the walls of the Oak Ridge Heights Police Department were collapsing faster than anyone could patch them. 3 officers, including the sergeant who had ordered Malik's arrest, were placed on indefinite unpaid suspension. The chief of police, under mounting pressure, announced his early retirement, effective immediately. He didn't even stay to finish the press conference. He walked out a side door, face hidden behind sunglasses, never looking back. But Malik wasn't interested in their cowardice. He was focused on the courtroom, focused on the fight ahead. And the fight was tilting in his favor. The DOJ's preliminary report leaked to the press, a blistering 142-page document outlining years of systemic racial profiling, unlawful stops, and internal cover-ups. The findings were clear. The Oak Ridge Heights Police Department has engaged in a pattern and practice of discriminatory policing in violation of federal law. The words hit the city like an earthquake. City council members scrambled to distance themselves. The mayor, who had once praised the department's tough-on-crime policies, now stammered through public apologies, promising reform. It was all too late. The damage was done, and Malik Parker's name was now tied not to a false accusation, but to a movement that could no longer be ignored. Across town, Westfield Market tried to save face. Their corporate executives issued a hollow apology. "We regret the distress caused to Mr. Parker and are reviewing our employee training protocols." It didn't help. Shoppers boycotted the store. Share prices for Westfield's parent company dipped sharply. The store manager who had pointed at Malik, the man who had sparked the entire nightmare with a single finger, was quietly fired. No farewell party. No severance package. Just a cardboard box and a security escort out the back door. Meanwhile, Malik's legal case moved forward. Isaiah Brooks turned depositions into a bloodbath. Officers who lied on reports crumbled under cross-examination. Supervisors who tried to justify the arrest were forced to admit they never reviewed the security footage. Westfield Market's corporate lawyers sweated as video after video showed Malik peacefully shopping, paying, and exiting, without a hint of theft or suspicious behavior. Every lie they had told, every excuse they had made, was now pinned to the courtroom walls like evidence in a murder trial. Because it was a kind of murder. The slow, grinding, sanctioned killing of dignity, of trust, of simple existence. But Malik Parker refused to let them finish the job. And now, it was their reputations being buried under the weight of undeniable truth. As Malik walked out of the courthouse that evening, the sky deep red with sunset, he passed a mural freshly painted on the side of a downtown building. It showed his silhouette, standing tall, unbroken, one hand holding up a receipt like a flag. Beneath it, in bold letters, "We belong here." Malik paused, staring up at it, heart heavy but steady. This wasn't the end. The verdict was still coming, but he had already won something they could never take back. The truth. And soon, the whole world would hear it. The courtroom buzzed with quiet electricity as the jury filed back into their seats. 12 men and women. Black, white, Latino, Asian. Every one of them holding Malik's fate and the city's conscience in their hands. The judge, a stern woman with sharp glasses and an even sharper tongue, rapped her gavel once. Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreman, a middle-aged black man with weary eyes, stood. "We have, Your Honor." The judge nodded. "Please read the verdict." The foreman cleared his throat, his voice firm, steady. In the case of Parker versus Oak Ridge Heights Police Department, Westfield Market, and named defendants. On the claim of false arrest, we find in favor of the plaintiff. On the claim of racial discrimination, we find in favor of the plaintiff. On the claim of malicious prosecution, we find in favor of the plaintiff. On the claim of emotional distress, we find in favor of the plaintiff. He paused, looked directly at Malik, and continued. We award compensatory damages in the amount of $4.2 million and punitive damages in the amount of $10 million. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Somewhere behind him, Malik heard his mother sob quietly. Isaiah Brooks clenched his fist on the table, a hard, small smile breaking across his face. The defense attorney sat frozen, faces pale, lips pressed into tight, defeated lines. But Malik? He sat still, breathing, processing, surviving. Because this wasn't about money. This was about vindication. The judge nodded solemnly. I commend the jury for its service, and I remind the defendants, justice delayed is justice denied. She banged the gavel once more. The case was over. Malik rose slowly, the weight of the moment pressing into his bones, his soul. He turned to face the gallery, packed with people who had shown up, day after day, rain or shine, to stand for something bigger than one man. Reporters shouted his name. Cameras flashed like fireworks. But Malik didn't rush toward them. He turned to Isaiah and shook his hand firmly. No words needed. They had done what so many thought impossible. They had forced the system to look itself in the mirror and not look away. Outside, on the courthouse steps, the crowd erupted into cheers as Malik appeared. But he lifted a hand, asking for silence. The crowd hushed instantly. He spoke softly, his voice carrying in the still evening air. This was never just about me. It's about every person who's ever been told they didn't belong. It's about every hand that shook trying to explain their innocence. About every receipt that didn't matter when the world already made up its mind. He paused, scanning the faces before him. Faces full of hope, of fire, of promise. They thought they could erase me. They thought they could bury the truth. He lifted his chin. But here we are. The crowd roared, fist raised high. Malik stepped down the steps slowly, shoulders square, dignity shining brighter than any spotlight. And though the night was falling over Oak Ridge Heights, Malik Parker walked forward into the future with something stronger than anger. Stronger than fear. Victory. Days later, the cameras were gone. The crowds had moved on to the next headline. The city buzzed as usual, busy streets, glowing storefronts, the everyday hum of life continuing as if the earth itself hadn't shifted. But for Malik Parker, everything had changed. He sat alone at a small table tucked into the corner of a quiet neighborhood cafe, the same cafe his mother used to bring him to after church when he was a boy. The chipped coffee cup in front of him steamed gently. The scent of baked bread and roasted beans wrapped around him like an old, familiar song. No noise. No speeches. No interviews. Just silence. And peace. Malik turned a worn envelope over in his hands, the settlement check issued just days earlier. He had plans for it. Not for cars. Not for jewelry. For community programs. For legal defense funds. For young black students who needed to know that someone had fought and won so they could dream a little bigger. He slid the envelope into his backpack without ceremony. It wasn't the money that mattered. It was the message. You cannot erase me. You cannot intimidate me. You cannot steal my humanity. He pulled out a battered notebook next. Flipping past pages filled with ideas, notes, strategies, Malik found an empty page and wrote 3 words. Built, not bought. The cost of dignity had been high, bruises that faded, nightmares that lingered longer. But he had paid it. In full. And now, every step he took from this day forward would be a quiet, permanent rebellion against a world that once told him he didn't belong. He rose from the table slowly, slipping the notebook into his jacket pocket. Outside, the evening sun stretched long golden fingers across the sidewalks. He pushed open the door, the little bell above it chiming softly, and stepped into the fading light. Not as a victim, not even as a hero, but as a man who refused to be broken. A man who reminded the world, and himself, that existence is resistance. And some victories don't come with parades or applause. Some victories are simply earned in the quiet decision to keep walking, to stand taller, to never, ever disappear again. Malik Parker walked down the street, head high, shoulders back, dignity unshakable. And behind him, whether the world realized it or not, the ground would never be quite the same again. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that inspire action and hope.